Climate change on the board agenda. As highlighted by COP26, the clamour for attention to climate change as a financial risk has become more urgent, and corporate boards, irrespective of size or industry, need to take note. This urgency is driven by the convergence of a number of factors, the most visible of which are the accelerating physical impacts, increasingly frequent and severe floods, wildfires, raising sea levels and droughts. As well as, of course, concern by many experts that the window for preventing more calamitous long-term consequences is rapidly closing. And related to climate risk are the transition risks that companies face as they work in conjunction with governments, regulators and other stakeholders to reduce their reliance on carbon and the impact on the climate. Investors are eager to understand whether boards have sufficient knowledge and adequate processes to oversee the management of climate-associated risks and to provide informed, proactive guidance as stewards of long-term value. And beyond the investor community, of course, other stakeholders, whether that be employees, customers, or the communities that provide companies their license to operate, are also voting with their feet against companies they perceive to be contributing to the problem. So the climate crisis is very much a board issue, but with such a complex issue, where should boards start? I would argue that the oversight of climate risk, and equally important the opportunities of course, starts with a climate competent board. Not every board member needs to have deep dive climate expertise, but the board as a whole needs to have climate risk and its impact on long-term value creation top of mind. They need to understand which issues are of greatest risk or strategic significance to the company, how they are embedded into the company's core business activities, and whether there is a strong executive leadership behind the company's response to climate crisis. Now, how oversight over climate change strategy is handled at the board level is essentially a matter of preference. Many boards have introduced a board committee to help bring focus to their oversight and serve as a catalyst for action. However, a climate change or ESG committee of itself is not the whole solution. And whatever the specific arrangements are, some thought needs to be given to the coordination between committees as well as the information flows to the board itself. So, for example, which governance body is taking responsibility for the data and the systems that produce that data? Which committee is looking at the various disclosures in the annual report and accounts? Is it the Audit committee, a risk committee perhaps, or an ESG committee? Overlap is inefficient but perhaps inevitable. The alternative, climate change risk falling between the gaps, is potentially calamitous. So back to my main question. Where should boards start? For me, it's all about having a solid governance oversight framework in place. 7 key things to think about. Board skills. Is the board itself fit for purpose with respect to climate change issues? As part of the board evaluation exercise, consider whether the board has the right mix of skill sets and whether the board members engage in sufficient professional development to keep themselves ahead of the curve. Secondly, risk and opportunity prioritisation. Is the board investing sufficient time in understanding stakeholders' priorities and the company's material climate change issues? Boards should be taking a comprehensive look at the climate risk impacting the business and re-evaluating their strategies to respond to any opportunities for growth and transformation. Thirdly, accountability. Will the board include climate-related targets in the CEO's remuneration metrics? In other people's targets? How deep into the organisation does the board expect climate-related metrics to reach? Fourthly, processes and controls. Collecting that climate-related data in a consistent method is really important, especially for those businesses with global operations and multiple product lines. Do all those responsible for collecting data gather it in the same way? Are the procedures and the controls in place well understood throughout the organisation? What are the controls in place to prevent greenwashing? Next, monitoring progress. Climate-related goals are typically mid to long term. Boards will need to consider what information they need and when they need it to oversee progress along the way. Dashboards can be really, really useful in this respect. 6. Reporting. Are the right issues being articulated clearly? Fundamentally, reporting should reflect both what the company is doing now and where it's going, with accompanying metrics and goals. And finally, assurance. What climate-related metrics are being assured, and by whom, and what's the value of that assurance? Is it internal assurance or third-party assurance? Will it be published? It's critical for companies to identify their priorities before pressure from customers, shareholders and other stakeholders push them to accelerate their timeline. So for me, these are the 7 key issues that should be front and centre as boardrooms provide their oversight over their company's response to the climate crisis. Thank you.